heard Governor Susana Martinez's 2015 State of the State address. What did you think of the issues she focused on today? And what do you want to see from the governor and the legislature in the year's 60-day session that's upcoming? Share your thoughts with our team by connecting with New Mexico in Focus on Facebook or Twitter. Now with us today at the table to talk about the address is former Republican State Senator Mark Boitano, former Democratic State Senator Richard Romero, UNM political science professor Gabriel Sanchez is with us again. He's also the director of the Latino Decisions Program, and Margaret Wright, a reporter with the New Mexico Political Report, a new online site that's covering politics in the legislature here. Thank you all for coming in today. Let me get around the table, starting with you, Margaret Wright. Just some overall impressions. We'll get to the individual steps of her speech, but tone and tenor, what did you think of the speech?
Sure, I was struck by language she used about courage and resisting apathy, which to me are potentially codes for pushing for some pretty ambitious legislation, potentially. I don't doubt that she's going to take advantage of the new power balance in the House.
Right.
So
Interesting.
It seemed like her word choice reinforced that.
It's funny you mentioned the word courage. Gabe Sanchez, good to see you here.
Always a pleasure.
I gave up on circling the word courage as it went along.
I counted 10.
Did you count 10?
Well, if you had courageous once, so 9 courage once.
We had a double hit too. We had courage 2 times. But interesting theme though, as Margaret's pointing out. It sets up a dynamic, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I looked at it really in the context of courage, reform,
Gotcha.
comfort, status quo.
Right.
And I think you heard that on the campaign trail, and you heard it again here. And I think it really sets the stage for how she's likely to govern in her second term.
Interesting. We had Richard Romero. Good to see you, Senator. We had some clues to this during the inaugural speech back in January 1st. That courage theme did sort of step out there, but she really doubled down here. What did you hear underneath those themes of courage? What went on for you?
Well, I agree with both these folks here. I think, she feels a little emboldened, very emboldened because of the change in leadership and, the strength in the House. Whether, any of that will matter in the end, I don't know. Right. I didn't hear any of the wedge issues other than the driver's license issue, but there's no issues like a woman's right to choose, gay marriage, or any of those issues. I think those have been pushed back, but issues like right to work, I mean, I saw that big. I think that's going to be a big issue for Democrats to deal with, and it'll be interesting to see how it moves in the Senate. I just cannot imagine passing there through one committee, and if it's tabled, the big question is it going to be blasted out? If they do, they're likely to go back to the days when I first started, when issues were debated on the floor. We had no committee system, so that's going to be interesting to see. And that's just one issue. There's several others, that I picked up on.
Interesting. Senator Mark Boitano, good to see you again. Of course, you've been with us on the previous State of the State address. We appreciate you coming back. That word courage is interesting to me. I want to stay with this and finish it with you, because one can view courage in lots of different ways. You can act courageously, not saying this about the governor, but recklessly and think it's courageous, or you can kind of step into a thing and think it's courageous. It's in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? Not necessarily saying I'm courageous, but how you're perceived in your courage, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, and also I think courage is an important word for politicians to remind themselves about, because the reality is there's going to be a lot of pressure in the Senate from interest groups to hold your ground. This is really where the debates will be. And I've found a number of times, I've had politicians tell me I can't vote my conscience because this or that or the other interest group is putting pressure on me. So if you think about it from the viewpoint of courage, maybe it's a way for the politicians to really do what they think is right and not necessarily listen to the interest groups. I thought the governor's presentation was fabulous. I mean, you talk about presentation content. This is actually the best speech I've heard, and you can see.
What differentiated it for you?
Well, I mean, it's little things. I mean, her passion. I heard Governor Johnson, Governor Richardson, and Governor Martinez now. Her passion, her articulation of words. Some words she would underline, bold, and italicize, and really make her point. And then that picture moment with the children and the emotion. I mean, we would have never seen former governors bring that emotion out with the children. So her presentation was spectacular. The content, a lot of familiar themes. Don't know if there's a lot of reform. I saw a couple of items in here that I think are reform and different than what we've heard before, but a lot of familiar themes.
Let me glad you mentioned the two young people at the end there who we absolutely wish the best of luck through a tragedy. I mean, terrible. I have to confess, I had forgotten about those kids, so I was almost relieved, Margaret Wright, to see them being acknowledged in a way, which is such a terrible thing that happened to me. Do you anticipate any controversy over using those kids in that manner? Is there anything that in your
I
gut?
had a little twinge of that, simply because she segued so quickly into urgings to move in directions that she used the speech to center on. So that struck me as a little bit troubling,
I wonder
perhaps.
how the Twitterverse is
but
doing on that one.
Yes,
Yeah, we'll
exactly.
see as time goes on. Let me stay with you with this one. One of the things she got into early, it seemed like she wanted to put to bed the idea that she could be potentially having her eyes cast towards somewhere else. And she said, and as we look ahead, I know this, I will not mark time. Do you think, is that what she meant, that she's not going to mark time with an aim to go somewhere else? And does that settle the issue with that wording?
I take her as at her word. She says she's in it for the long haul here in New Mexico, but it's hard to discount the fact that her team has such broad national connections, and the fact that she has been such a star in the national fundraising field. So it's hard to know if she is a player in terms of leveraging her name to help the national Republican infrastructure, or if it's something that she wants to step into full time.
Sure. Richard, I'm going to ask you the same question. She's surely going to be asked, or from what Margaret's saying, to get out there and really be a superstar for her party in this upcoming year. Is that what you heard when you heard "I will not mark time"? How did you hear that?
You know, I kind of feel like, you know, her sights are set that way, and you know, whether she likes it or not, I think she's going to be asked, and I think she'll take it on because she thinks it's a responsibility. I mean, she wouldn't be there if it weren't for the Republican Party, so she's going to honor those requests. So I see that happening. I mean, it's pretty natural. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, and I mean, anybody in her shoes would be doing the same thing. I mean, regardless of what she says. I don't think she has much control over where she's headed. You know,
fair enough, yeah.
So
In an election year,
Sure.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Finish up thought for us, if you would,
Well,
Senator Boitano.
with Governor Richardson, one of his ambitions was run for president. Gary Johnson said he wanted to run for president. Susana Martinez, I don't think that's really her ambition, her personal ambition. So for some politicians, I think personal ambition is one of the driving forces that moves you step by step by step. I think national political mood is going to rise Susana Martinez to the surface. I think it's going to happen naturally. I don't think she has any control over it, and she'll be at a point where she has to say, you know, I'm in or I'm out. But I don't think it's her personal ambition that's driving her to the national stage.
Did you hear a line in the sand, Gabe Sanchez, on this issue? Did you hear I'm in or out on this?
I didn't, and I don't think, to be honest, I don't really think, like everybody's been noting, that it's really her decision. A lot will be success over the next 2 years. I mean, this whole notion of her being on the national stage, yes, that's there, but there's about 7 or 8 other people in the same boat. So I think a lot of it will be, you know, a lot of the language she used, bipartisan effort. We're going to, you know, solve New Mexico's problems in a bipartisan way. If she's able to do that in this context, yeah, all of a sudden she's elevated. Now, if it doesn't, we've heard a lot of other folks being mentioned that are in the same shoes if they're not victorious in some of these policy agenda items, because let's be honest, there hasn't been a whole lot in the first term. So if some of this is successful, boom, she's on her way if she wants to do that. But I think we're kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit. There's still a lot to be settled here in New Mexico that'll set the stage for that,
Very much so.
upward mobility for her.
Economic development, Gabe, was clearly leading into this speech a big issue. I was struck by a couple of things. We should partner with these risk takers. And a couple paragraphs down, they're taking great risk. This has been the missing word around New Mexico when you talk to folks about business, about the idea of honoring folks who take a risk out there, as opposed to working for an institution where risk is really not that big of a deal, and how to support them.
Right.
I can imagine risk takers were pleased to hear this kind of language.
Absolutely. You're hearing folks from CNM to UNM, probably a lot of collective applause on that, because I think in this particular environment, and the elephant in the room is, where are we with the budget, declining federal government money? So I think without really having to go there and address it, she did so in very subtle ways that I thought was effective. Risk-taking in this environment, we really don't have a choice.
That's right.
You think back to things like, you know, the Tesla, you know, didn't really pan out, but it was a risk on her part and her administration. I think we're going to see more of that, set the stage for that here in the speech.
Margaret Wright, small business tax breaks seems to come up perennially. It's just a thing that always gets talked about. But I've got to wonder if this legislature might be in a mood to hear some more about this. It really takes some action because small business has been asking for this for quite a while.
Well, and I was thinking about that emphasis on her part in contrast to her and the legislature's changes to the top corporate income tax rates, which are going to have cascading effects for years to come. And so it's interesting that she was focusing less on that and the possible revenue liabilities of those and focusing more on small businesses, which I think the average person watching is also going to be highly tuned to that. And same with the people who are part of more entrepreneurial startup ventures that have been getting a lot of attention from local government, especially in Albuquerque.
Interesting. You guys have dealt with this in your time at the legislature as well. I want you to touch on a couple things, but Richard Romero, the idea of small business tax breaks, again, has been out there a long time. Is there a commonality that you recall from your time of what exactly small business wants for a tax break?
Well, I've always said that in order for capitalism to succeed, you've got to have favorable tax climates, manipulate the tax laws. You've got to have free reign on natural resources, and you've got to have cheap labor. And that's the dynamics that you have between Democrats and Republicans, And how much people suffer, I think, is the other part of it. But we've heard it. I mean, when I was in the legislature, we dropped the personal income tax because people told us this was going to open up the doors to everything. And really, it hasn't worked.
And that was no small drop, by the way, under Governor Richardson.
That was huge.
Yeah.
That was huge. And we've lost a lot of revenue in that case, in that situation. I think Democrats, will be fearful of giving tax breaks because you're losing revenue rather. And we have a situation where we just don't have that revenue anymore. I mean, with the price of oil dropping, less money. I see us possibly looking at the reserve in terms of making budget meet. And in this situation, I think there's that hope that oil will rebound, natural gas will rebound here in the next year or so, and the governor might be amenable to dipping into the reserve. We'll see. We'll see.
That's an interesting point. I'm going to watch out for that. But stay on that point, Senator Boitano. Again, during your time, the idea of tax breaks for small business. It's an interesting idea, but she's also proposing we threw in some ideas about adding more money to the pot. Folks just need working capital. They either need a break on the capital they have, but they need some more capital coming in.
Right.
Did something about that make sense to you, what she proposed there?
Well, I think we need to look at new tax breaks in the context of existing tax breaks. And the reality is the state of New Mexico has about $1 billion in tax incentives, tax credits. Right. Legislature in the last couple of years has really dug deep into what's the benefit, what's the reward for those, and they should. And I've noticed a new auditor actually has created a new office of incentive accountability, which I think is a good idea. So in that context, I think the legislature is going to be cautious. But the reality is, if we look at the national stage, if we're trying to bring corporate headquarters in, we have to become competitive nationally. And in order to be competitive nationally, we have to have tax breaks. Everybody else is doing it. We have to do it. The grocery.
Let me stop you there for a quick second, not to argue this out philosophically about taxes, because we could stay here all day. But we just had a number of states across the country that wanted an aggressive tax cutting scheme, so to speak, Kansas being one of them, and it just did not work out well for their budgets. Do you sense there's going to be some hesitation on Democrats' parts, perhaps looking at those results and thinking about our own situation here? Does that come into focus here as well?
Well, yeah, it does. It does. I mean, you have to look at the upside and the downside of any action you contemplate. But the reality is, center stage of this talk and the center stage of the election that we just came out of is jobs, jobs, jobs. How are we going to become more competitive? How are we going to grow jobs? And incentives are going to have to be a part of the discussion on both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely. I want everybody to take on this one because Mark set up beautifully, Gabe Sanchez, the $50 million fund, or whatever this is going to be called, closing fund for economic development. I have to imagine this. There's an interesting irony. It comes to mind here. Didn't Governor Richardson ask for the same kind of thing back when, and people had a fit about it because it was unsupervised, non-transparent, all that kind of stuff?
Right.
Is the public going to go for something similar?
You know,
it's a lot of details, it seems to be.
different times. You know, we're talking about a much different financial picture in the state. So I think it's possible in this context. In fact, many people might argue that's not enough money. It's the old adage, it takes money to make money. So some folks might say, look, is this really going to generate the big companies we're talking about? And some folks might say, hey, you know, go all into that, especially if we tap into some of the reserves. You know, so I think there's, you know, that context. And also she still uses Richardson's name, which is interesting to me. It's been quite a while since he's even been around. And I think, to me, if you know, you're a speechwriter, you say part of that is reminding the public, hey, transparency, clean governance, that was a big part of my first term in office. She alluded to that. So, hey, trust me with the utilization of that money that we're talking about. So I think these are very well put together by whoever wrote the speech, trying to connect those dots for the average person taking a look at it. And I think it was effective in that regard.
That's an interesting point, Gabe makes Margaret right, that the governor in essence is saying, trust me. I've earned your trust, maybe more accurately, by trying to root out this kind of stuff.
Sure.
I wonder if that's going to be enough for some on the other side of the aisle and the public without the details.
Well, speaking as somebody who, as part of my work, has to interface with the state government, I would say that there's a lot that she and the legislature can do to increase transparency and to take a look, for example, at webcasting committee meetings, at making records of those proceedings more accessible. Public records laws could definitely use more consistency, and there are agencies that actually flout the state records law. So I would love to see her do more on that front.
Sure.
Legislators as well.
Absolutely,
I think there's a lot of support for that closing fund
Okay.
now. You know, mostly because I think during the Tesla recruitment process, I think they found out that states like Texas, California, all of them have these closing funds, and we don't. As a matter of fact, I heard Senator George Munoz the other day say, if we're going to be a player, let's be a player. Let's ante up the money. Now, the big question is, do we now have it? Whereas even a month ago, we thought we had some part of it. But I think maybe there's support for it now, both on the part of Democrats and, of course, Republicans. So I think it may be a go.
That's interesting. Gabe, you know, one of the big applause lines was for right to work
Yeah.
legislation. She used this line, I firmly believe that every person should be allowed to choose for themselves whether they want to join a union or contribute to one. And it seems like this is going to be the fight. Your sense of that, has she made her case? Did she lay it out here in the state of the state? And if not, why?
No, I think she did. I mean, and I actually think it was effective in the way she put it very plainly. Instead of getting wonkish like, you know, us PhD types like to get, she said very clearly, hey, really, in my view, comes down to a very simple issue. You know, should people have the right to choose if they want to join a union? And if they choose not to, should they have to pay for it? When you put it that simply to the public, I think it's very easy for people to say, yeah, what are we talking about? So I think the way that she couched that was very effective. And if you just look at how much space in the speech was devoted to that issue versus some of these other social policy issues you alluded to earlier, I think it's clear that's going to be front and center of this. And I think it's an effective one because it really doesn't turn off a whole lot of moderate Democrats that something like abortion, any of these other social policy issues, all of a sudden people's guards get up. This one's a little bit more digestible. Remember, I think back in the 80s, it actually passed through the legislature a couple times, so we've been here and done that on this one. So I think for a number of reasons, it was a good one to pick, and I think she did an effective job of placing it out there.
Please, Richard.
One that I don't think it's going to go. I really believe that it's going to die in the Senate. They need 4 votes, whether it's to override an adverse committee report coming down to the floor of the Senate or to blast it out of committee. If that happens, then I think you really have chaos. And I don't think senators, there are a lot of them that still remember when we had nothing but chaos at one time. So I really think that's a basic Democratic issue that I don't think they're gonna let go of. It makes sense, like we said earlier, but I just don't see it going.
How do you think this started off, Senator Boitano? Are the lines drawn now? Is it clear to you? And Gabe makes a good point. In the public perception and how this is going to be parceled out, meaning the news bites or whatever the case may be, it plays well on the street, doesn't it? Nobody should be made to do this or the other thing.
Right.
Did she make that? Is that going to be resounding enough in your view?
Well, I think she made a good case. It's a no-brainer from my viewpoint, and I think a lot of people's viewpoint. You have national companies looking to come to a particular state, they look at a list. They look at gross receipts, taxes, and professional services. We're trying to bring, more firms in here. That's a let's take New Mexico off the list kind of thing. Right to work's the same thing. So I think the advocates are going to have the evidence to make a strong case. And unlike Richard, I see it's going to boil down to committee assignments on the Senate side, and it's going to boil down to a couple of votes. And I can identify 4 people in the Senate that may be inclined to support it, given the right evidence, given the right support. And the other thing is, how are they feeling at a particular moment about the unions? Because the unions play hardball. And on both sides of the aisle, sometimes unions play hardball and piss people off. So I think there are a lot of factors and dynamics in play, and I think there's a chance.
It's interesting, Margaret, in her wordplay, as I look at it on paper, it's not as if she's calling union people a bunch of bums. She's not. I mean, it's just, but she's also saying, if you have to pay in, it's a zero-sum game. You're not going to be able to make your rent. It's gas out of your vehicle. It's all of it. Very effective language when I look at it on paper. But the question still begs, as these guys were just talking, is that going to be enough public backdrop to make it get through the Senate and other places, as they say?
It's a good question, and I was struck to some extent by some of the historical dissonance on this, it being the day after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, and he was a strong proponent of unions, and he was a very explicitly opposed right-to-work legislation. So that was kind of an interesting moment of dissonance there. And I do think, the fact that the legislation actually does limit unions' ability to achieve collective or put forth collective action. It is something that does draw political questions and questions about whether or not this is a politically motivated move.
What do you think about it? Let's wrap up with you and Gabe. By the way, both those times you mentioned, those were vetoed at the governor's desk at the time. I'm interested in this right to work in this angle as well. Is this a blessing for Democrats? Meaning this is an absolute right on the button issue where there's no mushy middle here, right? So if you can't be a Democrat now, you can't be, so to speak. Is this the issue to really get people lit up on the other side and really have a tussle here?
It's possible. I think part of the dynamics are, one, unions just aren't as powerful as they used to be in that era. I think, don't quote me on the statistic, it's like 4 or 5% of New Mexico workers are members of a union. So you're not going to get the same kind of constituent pressure on this, but it does set up nicely if that's the issue. Think about it this way. Dems clearly don't want her to have quick success. So if this is going to be the issue, does it give Democrats the opportunity to say, I guess this is what it is? Right. Are we really going to be able to band together in this new era of being a minority party? That's right. If so, we have to practice that, and this gives them an opportunity to do that. I think we're forgetting about that huge change in who's running things, and it gives Democrats really the mechanism. Are we going to band together? They need 4 votes. Who's going to be one of the 4? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be you? That, I think, is going to be a big part of the conversation, and it really set the stage for if they're weak on this particular issue, watch out.
Interesting.
The interesting piece is going to be, because the Democrats have controlled both chambers, the give and take, the sending of bills over, knowing full well that they're not going to go, or sending them back, amended and so forth. Right. That won't happen now. So both parties, I think, Republicans in the House and Democrats in the Senate, will be under lots of pressure. They're going to be forced to take votes that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. They won't be able to just do it because of that.
Yeah. Margaret, we have $180 billion on the table for infrastructure. Yes. And it's a big number around these parts, but we've also got sliding projections for oil and gas. I didn't hear the governor couch her numbers at all, saying, well, 180 with an asterisk, perhaps, you know what I mean?
And there wasn't a lot of specificity because the state's infrastructure needs are pretty broad. There's water infrastructure, flood control, roads, particularly in areas where oil and gas has a heavy presence, I was down there recently. They're terrifyingly bad, and there's really intense effects on people who live in those areas. Right. So I think there's no doubt that the need is there, but how that will get allocated and where, especially given these shifting dynamics, will be really interesting.
Jump back over to the who gets it and where part is always interesting, isn't it? Help us out on that one, because again, everyone's got a need in every district in our state. So how does this actually work when you got a bigger number like this and that kind of potential?
Right. Well, it's much easier to come down than it is to go up. So that number will be a moving target. But be mindful, too, that there are several sources of capital projects. So general appropriations is a small source of that. And, I mean, we'll need to know how much we have in severance tax bonding authority this year. We don't know that number. The legislators won't know that number until we get closer to the end of the session. So infrastructure is a key piece in economic development.
Right.
And so, you know, if that's center stage for legislators in the executive branch, that needs to be a piece that, you know, people commit to. Also, I think there's a new, when Richard and I were in the Senate, there was a lot of emphasis on individual projects. I think now that legislators are coming together and working, you know, the Paseo project is a good example, where Rs and Ds work together to put that together with, you know, the city and the county commission. I think we'll see more cooperation among governmental entities to get these capital projects done. So it'll move forward.
Interesting. Richard Romero, is 180 enough? Is in fact, in the scheme of all things, that's a small number.
Yeah, it never is enough.
Yeah.
It's over 3 years, that's what I heard. So that's not a whole lot in 1 year. It just depends on how much pork there is available. You know, the old scheme that we have, you know, the statewide projects go first, and then the rest is divided amongst the governor, the House, and the Senate, you know, in 3 ways. So it just depends on how much money, like Mark says. If there's a lot, and there could be, you know, that's always a good place to work with. I mean, to put into the economy for jobs and so forth. So
It's one of those instant, the reason I call it shovel ready, right? It's instant stuff, allegedly. We'll see what happens. Now, education, of course, was a big part of the governor's first 4 years, and it's going to be the next 4 years, and she made no bones about it here. Gabe Sanchez, it's interesting. I would have thought it would have slid up on the list a little bit higher. She would have gotten to education right off the bat, which is not the point. But she's also proposing some interesting things for teachers and such. How did, in the general terms about education, what struck you in her speech?
Well, to me, if you would ask me what was the speech about, I think it was about education. Okay. Started with the context of every decision we make, we should make it in the context of, is this good for our kids?
Gotcha.
Opened with that, closed with the positive imagery you saw there, emphasizing again, let's think about the kids. So I think it really was a context about education policy. Sure. She weaved in some old stuff that we've heard a lot about, used a lot of the language about the grading system, was weaved in there, but there was some new stuff in there, the mentoring programs. I think 2,000 raised for new teachers has been something we heard of late on the campaign trail. All of these things on its face seem obvious and without a whole lot of contradiction, but any of these, 2,000 for new teachers, who doesn't get behind that? Well, all the teachers that have been on the job for 10, 20, 30 years say, wait a minute, what about me? So a lot of this, I think, was positive in the context of let's focus on the kids, but the devil's in the details, and the big question for a lot of this is, when we talk about budget numbers, she said, I'm going to expand pre-K again this year. No definitive number about how much, because where's the money going to come from? So I think that'll really be what folks start to look at. Is there going to be money to do all these programs? If not, which is probably what most of us would agree, there's going to have to be some priorities set, and where will things fall into play of all the things that she discussed today.
Interesting. Margaret, you know, the word courage came up a couple of times in this section too. It's very interesting. Talking about Gadsden, the courage about saying no more excuses, the courage of Judith Foster, the elementary school principal in Las Cruces, is mentioned. I was really struck, however, about the idea of potentially having social workers available at schools. We have had many folks come in this building and tell us the exact thing over a number of years. With my colleague Megan Kamerick for Public Square, when she does these types of programs, people talk about it all the time. We're finally getting this somewhere. How do you think this is going to play?
That was really intriguing. All her rhetoric in several places was intriguing. I mean, I think having social workers in the schools is something that could be a really key reform. I was intrigued by the fact that she said that we had taken ourselves outside of, or out from under an unworkable federal education law, which I wanted to kind of fact check a little bit, because I think she's talking about No Child Left Behind. And just mention that we, like many other states, did have a waiver extended, but we are still subject to No Child Left Behind. And there are also measures that she and the public education secretary have spearheaded that many in the education community say actually micromanage and eliminate federal control or local control. The third grade retention bill is one of those. So that stuff was interesting to me.
Very much so. Got to potpourri here. Third grade retention. We've got.
We've done that. 1986, Senate Bill 106. We took the authority away from principals and parents and gave it to teachers to hold kids back. It didn't work. In the late 90s, when we were there, we turned it back into what we have today. When I was a kid, we
Let
used
me ask you a question. What was the thrust in &86 to give more power to the teachers? I'm curious what the
the
chatter was.
same, that we were just
really?
flushing kids up. Kids weren't learning, and and it sounds good. The problem is that I would personally, if I was in the legislature, I'd be voting for it just for this reason. Give it a shot, see what happens. And then it's probably what you're going to find out is just going to get backed up with kids who can't read. I think the idea behind it is that somehow teachers aren't teaching, and therefore kids aren't reading, and that's not really the reason. There's those other issues that the school has no control over, and they deal with parents who really aren't good parents. They just don't support their kids the way they should, for maybe good reasons.
Sure.
But the problem is that I try it and say, hey, see what happens. It's going to back up, and we're going to go back to what we have today, and that is people talking about the particular kid. The thing that might happen is you might create a sense of urgency on the part of parents for once.
Okay.
And if that happens, maybe that will create maybe support for more money for helping these kids read, because I think that's where it's going to be. We've had it. I mean, when I was in school, we used to retain kids, and they turned out to be bullies on the playground, really.
Well, you hear that a lot, Senator Boitano. The idea of 14-year-olds mixed in with 10-year-olds makes people uncomfortable and all that kind of thing. But the senator makes an interesting point, though. Why not just put it in play and then manage the situation and just see what happens? I mean, I know your answer on that, but
Well,
please, go
I
ahead.
think this is one of the examples. Right to Work's one example, and this is another example where perhaps a politician's conscience might say something than the people around them who are encouraging them to do something else. So, I think of courage. I'm the board president of a charter school, and I've talked to kids who are in 4th grade that don't read, and their path to the future is littered with failure. And so there's really no reason whatsoever that we should pass children along who can't read by 3rd grade. I mean, that's my personal opinion. As far as education goes, one of the things I saw some reform here. So this idea of an adjunct teacher, I think, in a classroom, we do that in college, but we don't do that in K through 12. And I think it's a great idea. I really do. So there's going to be a lot of pushback from the unions to let an unlicensed person in the classroom, but it makes a lot of sense, and I think there's some reform there. Bringing it back to the parents too, and just working with children, youth, and families on child advocacy centers. I think that idea is reform. And bringing it back to family formation and the role that plays in education. I mean, the family is the original Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. And unfortunately, we have a lot of fractured families, and the teachers suffer because of that. The administration suffers. I think a lot of people think, well, you're the reason why teacher, principal, administration, the kids are failing. But, if we look at that parental piece, that family formation piece, we need to look hard there as well. So some of these reforms, I think, will bring us moving in that direction, and it's a good thing.
Gabe, the adjunct thing is, I want to stay with that for a second. Very interesting, isn't it? You think we would be a natural city here in Albuquerque for this, with all the scientists we get lousy on every corner, right?
We've done it.
Yeah,
Yeah, right,
We did it
exactly.
at Sandia when I was principal there.
That's right. Oh, that's
Sandia
right, too.
Labs.
That's right.
3 teachers, 3 scientists that taught a class at night.
Yeah.
It took a little while to get the licensing worked out, but it's nothing new. I mean,
It's a lot of this, it sounds new, it's repackaging.
Yeah.
I remember when I got back to New Mexico in about '05, first thing a number of us looked at is what natural resources do we have in the state? By natural, I mean human capital. And we say a lot of retired faculty, famous people happen to retire in Santa Fe. You've got a lot of engineers that retire from the labs that are right there. So I agree, it's not new. It's being packaged as a brand new reform. A lot of it is just trying to figure out the details on a much wider scale than a few here, a few there.
Right.
And if we're able to do that, then I think it's a reform that really would make sense and could have a lot of impact.
Interesting.
It's
Richard,
like,
please.
it's like concurrent enrollment. I mean, they talk like this is something new. I mean, we've been doing it since, I mean, I was principal at Albuquerque High, and we had kids at UNM taking classes. We had one kid that was bright, was teaching calculus, believe it or not, when he was a senior. So
believe it.
it's nothing new. I mean, the avenues are there. Whether students and parents take advantage of it, I think is the key. You know?
It's all about scalability, really.
That's right.
Package it, figure it out, and make it on a wider scale.
You know, Margot, we've got a pretty good push from this administration, meaning here in Albuquerque, the Berry administration and others, on STEM education. And I don't know, I like this adjunct thing, but I would have loved to have heard her say, we could spill some of this talent to kids who are not necessarily taking calculus, perhaps a little bit lower on the need. Do you know what I mean? It really gets some horsepower in some other types of school population.
Well, I wonder too if the adjuncts will be subject to the same value-added model kinds of evaluations that every other teacher is subject to. Because that could be another source of
Right?
Could be a deal
extreme debate among
I'm just thinking about a couple of brilliant scientists I know that have a real issue with that.
Yes.
They have, like, I don't need to do this, you know, one of those things. Truancy, she talked about, we have about 10 minutes left, so I want to cover it to make sure I don't miss anything here. But interesting how, for habitually truant students, Senator Romero, the idea of taking away their driver's license.
You know, every time that bill is brought up, I think of 1993, my first year in the legislature. I passed that bill.
Oh, no kidding.
Governor King vetoed it. As a matter of fact, Bill Clinton had just passed it in Arkansas. Wow. It passed in Florida. Huh. It's nothing new. It just, and I know the consultant or the person close to Governor King that told him to veto it. I mean, there's this idea that we're punishing kids who go to work. Most of the kids that go to work go to school. Yeah. The ones that don't are the ones that are out just cruising around. So I really have no sympathy, and I wish it would pass, but it may have a tough time. I know Senator Brandt is trying to get it through. Sure. Representative Larrañaga tried it a few years ago. The fellow from the east side, who's on the Board of Regents at Eastern. Anyway, he was a House member. He passed, or tried to pass it, but we got it through. We got it through in the same Arkansas form that Clinton signed. So.
That's interesting. I had no idea. That's very interesting. Senator Boitano, you know, the question still sort of begs, so who does it help in the long run when a kid loses his license? We understand the reasons. It's an incentive to get back in school to get your license back. Do you know of situations where that actually works in other states? I've not heard or seen research about this.
I don't know. Richard might have more of the details, but I think it sends a message.
Okay.
And I mean, you know, I have 4 kids, and when they were teenagers, driving was one of their top priorities. And if you pull the plug on that freedom, you're sending a strong message as a household and as a community to the students. So, if nothing else, it does send a strong message. And I think, you know, it's a step in the right direction. But I mean, truancy. I mean, the reality is that if we look at the path of failure for students, truancy, mobility, I mean, there are these factors that we really need to be working on the front end. If kids are moving around in rental properties every 6 months, that's an issue. The fact that they're not showing up for school, it's an issue. And so we have to work front end to solve serious education problems. Truancy is one of the front end problems. So putting together teachers, mentors, you know, it's not a new idea. Maybe we can bump that up a little bit. Principals that have been successful in reducing truancy. And then also bringing the parents into the equation. Right. You know, this is an important piece of the puzzle, and I think more emphasis needs to be put on that.
I'd also posit that young people should be the first source of information on policies that could support them, and talking to them about things that are turning them away from school. There's increasing criticism by students about the frequency and intensity of high stakes testing in schools, and it would just be interesting to hear from young people what would make a difference to them.
It's interesting. I appreciate you saying that, because we've covered that here on our station with Public Square with Megan Kamrick. It's an interesting dynamic you hear from students themselves about the reasons they either do or do not do something. It's always vastly different from what us as older people think they're going through. It's very interesting, isn't it? I'm going to wrap up here in about 4 minutes, Gabe. Let's finish with just overall, sort of how we started. Your overall impressions now that we've talked it through. Again, state of the states are not something people bring up in July and say, oh, you know what, how's that state of the state thing working? However, it is important, it seems to be, in this particular year, where this is the year we need some cohesion, some decision making, some leadership with limited money. Did she accomplish that goal? Should people feel safer about the state of things with her in charge? at this point?
I don't know if she quite did that,
Yeah.
largely because a lot of this is, okay, this all sounded great, where's the money to pay for any of this? And I don't think, obviously, we wouldn't expect to hear a plan to dig us out of the budget deficit and this early in the stage, but without hearing that, I think a lot of people say, this sounds very interesting. I agree with my colleague that I don't know if I'd say this is one of the best speeches I've ever heard from her, definitely. I think she's really stepped up, really the performance and, the everything from the packaging, the way the speech was written, connection of all the dots, the imagery, just her delivery of the speech, everything really to me has been much better than what we've seen from her in the past. So I think for a lot of people that will be the takeaway message. I think what that leaves is a lingering question, however, is this more about where she's going to platform after this than really about the substance of what's going on in the stage.
Sure.
I think most people look at that and say, wow, it seems like she's much more polished. Is that a road to VP or whatever it might be? So, did she accomplish the goal of really setting that courageous leadership that she called for? Much better than I think even I expected. I just don't know if in the context of this budget, if it's really going to set the stage for bipartisan movement to, do things big that are going to change our economy.
Sure, fair enough. Margaret, your last thoughts on this?
Oh, it's just, I agree that it was a really strong speech. I'm just not, it'll be interesting to see whether legislators found it to be any kind of a rallying cry one way or another. And there's so many unanswered questions in terms of how legislation is going to flow through the newly aligned House. So yeah, that'll be really interesting.
Isn't
to see
that, I'm
play
glad
out.
you made that point again, because Senator Romero, this is the big unknown. We don't know how this is all being heard, so to speak, isn't it? It's very interesting. By tomorrow morning, it could be like it never happened once it starts,
That scene with those two kids was pretty touching. That really did it. And she looked, I agree with all of you, I think she looked a lot more polished and emphasized certain things, so I agree.
Interesting. Senator Mark Boitano, what did you think?
Progress over politics, courage. I think those were key words. And the thing, I just finished this book, Tip and the Gipper, and very interesting study from Chris Matthews on leadership. People have strongly felt principles, but they sacrifice it for the greater good. The greater good this session, the governor wanted us to know, is the spirit of children. An amazing thing. So I think there are some people in the Senate, older veteran legislators, who I think might build a coalition on some of these issues. And just like Reagan and Tip sacrificed their personal agenda for the greater good, I think that's going to be key. And the interesting thing to me is that the bipartisan leadership in the Senate is veteran. So they've been to this dance before, and it'll be interesting to see how they react in this new environment.
Dare I ask you for your 4 Democrat names that you think might be available? I think I have a guess on 2. I mean, if you're not willing, that's fine. I understand, but I think it's interesting that you think there were 4 votes there that could possibly do that. Yeah.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
Several have worked together on finance,
Okay.
and another was a committee chair, business committee chair, and then one is in a leadership position now over on the Senate.
There's some Senate calculus. We can figure that out. I think you might know who you're talking about there. Thank you all for being here. These are always interesting times, these State of the State addresses. I agree with everybody. If you compare the speech she made this time to last year, where there were sections of it I felt like she hadn't even read for the first time, which is unfair, but it's just her performance made it seem that way. She seemed very on top of this speech, because I would propose that it's more from where she's coming from, as opposed to something given to her and saying, read this. It sounded much more personal. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if she was the one that drove the whole idea with the kids and stuff, and really said, let's make this about something bigger than just policy stuff. So
Electoral success breeds confidence.
there you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It does, it really does.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you all Friday night for more reaction with a great group of panelists at 7 o'clock on Channel 5.1. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.